This is a moment in Jewish history. Mendel Beilis was falsely accused of murdering a child, and his trial in 1913 was big news in Russia and throughout the world. It was considered the last of the blood libels, and when he was finally exonerated, he moved to the land of Israel. Because Mendel Beilis withstood the pressure in a Russian prison for 2 years, refusing to falsely admit guilt or point the finger at any of his fellow Jews, he was considered a hero. Upon his arrival in Israel, which took place close to Passover, he was greeted by shouts of "Long live Beilis," and met with leaders of the community, including Rabbi Avraham Yitzhak Kook, the first chief rabbi of the land of Israel. Students came to greet him with flags and flowers and a band. That all happened after his dramatic trial. First, some background information. Mendel Beilis was born in 1874 to a Hasidic family, but as he grew up, he became secular and often worked on Shabbat if necessary. He served in the army of the Russian Empire, got married, had 5 children, and worked at a brick factory near Kiev. Beilis worked long hours and had good relations with both Jewish and non-Jewish communities. He received special permission to leave the Pale of Settlement in order to work at an office in the brick factory near the all-Christian village, where he was well liked by his co-workers. On March 20th, 1911, 12-year-old Andrei Yushkinsky was murdered, and his body was found near the factory. A criminal gang, led by a woman named Vera Chibiriak, had been known in the village for some time. They committed thefts and intimidation. Young Andrei had the misfortune of stumbling upon them and overheard part of their conversation. The generally accepted truth is that it was she and her henchmen that did away with Andrei to silence him. The misfortune of Mendel Beilis is that he was a Jewish man who just happened to be working in the same area on the same day. But Mendel Beilis was not just accused of murder, he was accused of being part of a secret Jewish conspiracy to kill Christian children and use their blood to make Passover matzah. The false accusation had been around since the Middle Ages. I recall a comic strip by Jewish writer and artist Jordan Gorfinkel, in which he jokingly said that if blood were in fact used in matzah, then why isn't it pink? But all jokes aside, the blood libel has plagued Jewish communities for generations. Pope Gregory X issued the Papal Protection of the Jews in 1272. In it, he states that sometimes unscrupulous Christians would falsely accuse Jews for monetary gain. He states that anyone who knows anything about Judaism knows it is against the Jewish religion to consume blood or non-kosher animals of any kind, let alone commit murder. But the Pope's call for understanding was not always heeded, especially not in the Russian Empire, keen on finding a scapegoat, especially for their flailing empire. The Russian authorities sent prosecutors to make sure that Beilis was deemed guilty. Vera Chibiriak and members of her gang were initially arrested, but several days later, Beilis got a knock on his door. He writes in his autobiography that the arrest surprised him, and went as follows. "You are a Jew, are you not? Where do you pray? Is there a synagogue here? I am a Jew. There is no synagogue here, but one can pray at home. Do you observe the Sabbath? The factory is kept running on Saturdays, so I cannot leave the place." That was just the beginning. Although Beilis was respectful of his Jewish heritage and kept some traditions, he was a typical secular Russian Jew. Nevertheless, the authorities continued to try and pin on him some elaborate secret scheme. They asked, "Are you a Hasid or a Misnagid?" "I am a Jew," I answered, "and I have no idea of the distinction between Hasid and Misnagid." "What do you Jews call an afikoman?" To these I have but the same answer. Beilis continued, "I began to regard these men as somewhat unbalanced. What could they possibly want? What had Yushkinsky's murder have to do with the afikoman? And furthermore, how did the difference between Hasidim and Misnagin concern them? I could only imagine that they were poking fun at me, but unfortunately it was no matter of jest. In their hearts, perhaps there was a deep conviction that Vera had murdered the boy. Perhaps these questions were directed at me under orders from the powers above. Indeed, the orders did come from the Russian higher-ups. Beilis spent 2 years in prison. His trial finally came in 1913 and drew international attention. Famous writers and scientists from around the world decried his arrest, including H.G. Wells, Arthur Conan Doyle, Booker T. Washington, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Beilis had a top attorney who felt that he was not just defending an individual, but the entire Jewish people. Against Beilis was a group called the Black Hundreds, who supported the Russian monarchy. At the trial, experts were brought in. Both Jewish and Christian witnesses testified that Beilis was innocent. Witnesses for the prosecution fell in Beilis's favor as well. One was the lamplighter, whom the Black Hundreds were sure would prove that Beilis had committed the murder, but he said he had been plied with vodka, and he knew nothing of the night in question. Another witness, an old beggar woman in rags, caused laughter in the courtroom when she angrily told the judge to leave her alone. The night of the murder she spent sleeping in the market where she collected charity, and the little money she got she used on alcohol to drown her sorrows. The experts brought in by the prosecution to try and attack the Jewish religion were revealed to be ignorant and easily disproved in court. The jury was made up of simple, hardworking, religious Russian peasants. After over 30 days of testimony, it was finally time for the verdict. The jury unanimously declared him not guilty. There was open weeping of joy in the courtroom. Beilis became a hero not only to the Jewish community, but to the average Russian impressed with his dignity under pressure. And when it was all said and done, Beilis and his family moved to Israel, where he had celebrity status. Beilis wrote, "For quite some time I would wander around inspecting every corner of the country, breathing the refreshing air. At first I could not sleep at night. I felt as though I did not want to lose a moment of the fragrant, inspiring nights in Palestine." The first Saturday in the land, Rabbi Cook invited me to attend his synagogue, where he held a 2-hour discourse about me. It was almost Passover, and innumerable tourists were arriving in Palestine for the holiday. Almost every ship brought 700 or 800 people, all of whom wanted to meet and greet me, to shake my hand, and express their sympathy. These in addition to the native Palestinians. At last I decided to visit Jerusalem. Within no time the news had spread throughout the town, and endless receptions began. In 3 days that I spent in Jerusalem, I had to visit all the synagogues, inspect the hospitals and charity institutions. But the greatest point of interest for me was the Wailing Wall and the site of the ancient temple. The Jews throughout the world prayed for a happy outcome of my fate during the whole time of my imprisonment until the day of my liberation. My misfortune was the misfortune of the whole Jewish people, but there was something closer to me in the fact that Jews had prayed at the Wailing Wall there, where Jews have wept and prayed for almost 2,000 years, bemoaning the great national loss, the supreme tragedy of the Jewish people, their bitter exile. My trial was but an episode in the history of our life in the diaspora, but it was a part in the record of our national sorrows. Surely the praying for me at the Wailing Wall was most appropriate. It was with mixed feelings that I came close to the old wall, to the silent witness of the ancient Jewish glory and the present inglory. As I was standing at the wall, absorbed in thought, I heard a sudden cry. Turning, I saw H. Berlin, one of the members of my party, crying. It was surprising from a man who had no Jewish characteristics whatsoever. He had been supposed to be far removed from Judaism altogether. His daughter, a doctor who could not even speak any Yiddish, was crying. Berlin later explained to me that he had cried both from sadness and joy. I reminded myself of our exile, but also thought of the new hope for a Jewish homeland, he said. On the site of the ancient temple, as everyone knows, there now stands a Mohammedan mosque. Pious Jews go nowhere near it, and the Mohammedans permit no unbelievers to enter it. In my case, however, an exception was made. "We will permit you to enter the mosque," I was told by one of the leading Arabs. You belong to the 3 great Jewish heroes and martyrs. One of the others he mentioned was Dreyfus. I was given a guide to take me through the place and was shown all the curiosities. I saw the place where Solomon was supposed to keep his horses and the rostrum from which he addressed the people. From Jerusalem, I returned to Tel Aviv and began the process of becoming a resident gradually. As time went on, I became more attached to Palestine. The climate was doing me good. It healed my physical and spiritual wounds. In a short time, I felt as though I were a native of the country, as though I had been born there and lived there all my life. In Tel Aviv, for the first time, I began to appreciate what the true Jewish life is. I saw for the first time a race of proud, uncringing Jews who lived life openly and unafraid. So wrote Mendel Beilis in his autobiography. Unfortunately, he and his family did not stay in the land of Israel. World War I changed everything. Beilis, like most other residents, struggled to make ends meet. He resisted leaving the land he loved for as long as possible until 1921, when things were so bad he and his family left for the United States. Beilis spent the rest of his years in Bronx, New York. In an interview from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency from 1933, he stated that he was offered large sums from Hollywood movie deals and to appear on stage, but he turned it down. Quote, "These offers involved my exploiting myself as a Jew and as a Jewish victim of a cruel and unjust persecution, so I refuse and would still refuse today. I went to Palestine hoping to find peace there, but the war intervened. I lost whatever little money I had. My oldest son died there, and I found it impossible to make a living. But even here, the shadow of the trial hangs over my head. It seems as if I will never get rid of it. I did not ask to be chosen as a victim, a korban, to stand up for the entire Jewish race. I was happy where I was. I had my work, my family, my friends. Suddenly, I was taken away from this and became a symbol for the entire Jewish people. But since fate had chosen me, I went through the ordeal. I suffered and my family suffered. The Russian Gentiles, who sacrificed themselves for me, there was real heroism. They knew that by defending me, their careers would be ruined. Even their very lives would not be safe. But they persisted because they knew I was innocent. But I lived to see the rotten Tsarist regime crumble. I lived to tell the whole story. And that is a miracle. When Mendel Beilis died in 1934, over 3,000 people crowded in the streets at his funeral. Rabbi Idel Idelson of Eldridge Street Synagogue stated at the funeral, "His name is holy to Jews throughout the world." With tears streaming down his face, he pointed to the weeping family. "Don't think that only the family has lost a dear one. The Jewish people have lost a great man." His grandson, J. Beilis, stated in the Jerusalem Post at the 100th anniversary of the trial the following, "Often I'm asked what it means to be the grandson of Mendel Beilis, and that's a very easy question to answer. At a very young age, some 50 years ago, adults would come up to my father and many times openly weep at his feet. I believe that my grandfather's trial was a warning to many Jews. Perhaps we even have survivors among the people in this very room that were able to leave some of those countries, saving them from the Shoah." J. Beilis went on to re-edit his grandfather's autobiography with new translations and notes, retitled Blood Libel, The Life and Memory of Mendel Beilis. This has been a moment in Jewish history. For questions or comments and past shows, you can visit benbresky.substack.com. Thank you to all the listeners, many of whom have come up to me personally and sent me emails telling me how much they enjoy the podcast. These words encourage me to continue. Thank you for listening, and Shalom.